Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic talk of the Tech Educators Career Week. Just to sort of introduce Tech Educators before we move over to Phil and his incredible talk, and the reason we run these Career Weeks. Career Week for us is really about demonstrating that the world of tech isn't just the things that you see with billionaire tech owners such as Elon Musk or the rest of them, that actually having a real career in tech is something that's achievable for everybody. And the great thing about that I believe in Careers Week is we get some of the world's best speakers come here and show that there's real people in tech doing real things and giving their advice and supporting people into the world of tech and careers. We're joined today by Phil Hawksworth from Netlify, and Phil is going to talk to us about his experience as a hiring manager and his confessions of what it would help you from someone who's probably seen it all. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Phil and let him walk through his talk. And at the end, if you have any questions, please do ask them in chat, and I'll make sure that I fill them over to Phil as well. So Phil, over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks so much, James. Well, thanks for a lovely introduction, and thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be able to join this event. When I learned about it, I just thought it sounded excellent and really something to be a part of. Not intimidated at all by the introduction and learning that all of the talks so far have been wonderful. I know there is a panel later on today that I'll be joining, which is about imposter syndrome. It never goes away. It never goes away. So we're learning all the time. But let's get into it. I did. I'm very grateful for the nice introduction from James. I do have an intro of my own as well, which I'll just expand a tiny bit. As you did here, my name's Phil Hawksworth. I'm based in St Albans in the UK, just a little bit north of London. And I work at a company called Netlify, who hopefully some of you may have heard of. I've been there for about coming up to 6 years. So at the point that I joined Netlify, when I would tell people I worked at Netlify, they'd go, I'm sorry, who's that? What's that? So I would always follow it up with an explanation of who we are. These days, more people know about it, which is very, very gratifying, but I never want to assume. So we are a web hosting and infrastructure company who really try and make it as easy as possible for you to get your projects deployed and online and out onto the web as quickly as possible. So I promise that's the end of my sales pitch for that. But that's just a little bit of context of who we are. As James said, we are going to have time for some questions later on, and I'm delighted to take all and any of your questions. If for any reason we don't get around to your question, or if something occurs to you later on, you can always reach me on the internet. I'm very, very happy to take questions and have discussions, on the internet. I always used to share this handle. I'm at Phil Hawksworth on Twitter. I don't know. Is that the best thing to do these days? Are we still talking about that? But luckily, I'm effectively, I have the same handle everywhere, so you can find me in places. And my name, luckily for me, I always use my name as my handle, so it's easy for me to remember. You've got to do a little bit more work, but it's always just at Phil Hawksworth. So if you want to ask me questions on Twitter or Threads, I guess, or Mastodon or wherever, please don't hesitate. I'm very, very happy to take questions. What I should probably do, though, is I probably should just be sharing my own domain. I have a website. I've had it for many years. You can tell I've had it for many years because of what a ridiculous domain name I had. I thought dropping the last 2 letters of my surname and adding an X, that would be cool. So I registered that as a domain. No one knows how to pronounce that. Or if I say Hawksworks, they say, well, how do you spell that? Lots of confusion, but at least it's one domain and it's a place that I own, and you'll always be able to find me there. So you can always ask me questions by there as well, and I'll probably refer to that a little bit as we go. I should maybe start out with an apology, which is never a strong place to start a presentation. But let's be honest, this is a horrible title for a talk. I thought when asked if I could maybe talk along these lines, I thought that's a punchy, nice title for a talk. The honest answer is, if I was to rewrite the title for this talk, maybe I'd call it "What I Wish I Could Have Told the Thousands of Applicants I've Reviewed in Order to Make Life Easier." That's not a punchy title for a talk, so I've snuck it in this way instead. if I'm going to be even more honest, I would maybe expand that and say, in order to make my own life easier, because that's kind of what I wanted. But luckily, by making my own life easier as someone who does do recruitment and does hire people, by association, it's making the life easier for the candidate as well. So hopefully, even though I'm being horribly self-serving with this presentation, hopefully it also is useful to you as well. What's happened over my career is that I've found myself in the position of recruiting people into teams, and as a result, I've seen both sides of the coin, because of course, I've been on the other side of that desk many times as well. And throughout the course of this this presentation, I'll try and kind of expose a few secrets, or maybe just things that we've overlooked. The first one of which is the secret that hiring managers really want you to be the one. They want the first applicant that they see to be the center of the bullseye. So they are cheering for you, and they want you to succeed. It's not a question of, well, we want to be special, so we want to spend 6 months hiring for this role, and we want to review thousands of applicants. If the right person arrives straight away, then all the better. So that's an interesting thing, I think, to know straight away, that they want you to succeed, because we want to get through this as quickly as possible and expand our teams and get the right people to work alongside. So how's this going to break down? Well, I think we'll have about 10 minutes of me giving some context, really. I thought it's important to give you some background about why I'm here, what my career has been, and how I navigated my way through that. And then maybe 10 to 15 minutes or so of the things I wish I'd known along the way, and the things I wish I could have shared along the way, and really just talk about that. Before that, there is a few minutes of what my father would call twaddle, but don't worry, we're just about through that now, and then we'll get into the rest of the talk, and then of course into the hopefully what could be a particularly valuable part, which is the questions and the discussion at the end. Again, happy to talk about any aspect of this and anything that comes to mind. So before we get into that, before we get to these questions and that discussion, let's jump into the first section of this. My journey and my career, again, really for some context setting, so you know who's talking to you, but also what a career in this industry might look like. And of course, there are as many different types of career and types of journey as there are people, I suspect. But this one's mine. I've been working in the web industry for a little over 24 years. Can't quite say 25. I'm looking forward to September, when I'll be able to say 25, and then what's that? Is that my silver jubilee? I don't know what it works out as, but I get some precious metal, I think, at that point, but not yet. But it started not where I would have expected. It started, I was doing a degree in civil engineering, is what I decided to study back in the day, and hated it. Didn't take to it, wasn't the course for me, and luckily I was very fortunate to be supported by my family in changing direction, and so I sought out a degree in computer science and business administration. I did that at Aston in Birmingham, and somehow in 1999 I graduated with a 2.2 by the skin of my teeth. It was not plain sailing. Found it very difficult, and didn't love it, I'll be very honest. Some aspects of it I really enjoyed, some aspects of it I hated, and this concluded in 1999, and the thing that I work in now is web development, and there was no aspect of web development in that course whatsoever. Really, that hadn't quite taken hold in the same way, certainly wasn't part of the syllabus. Don't get me wrong, there are aspects of things that I've learned there that I very much have applied, but there was no aspect that was focused on web development as part of that degree. The way I found my way into enjoying web development and discovering that I enjoyed it was off to the side. You know, the friends and my fellow students then at the time, some of them were a little bit more learned than me. All of them were, let's be honest. They hinted at me some of the things that I could be playing with. And so I started playing with writing HTML and absolutely adored the fact that rather than the kind of software engineering I had been doing as part of my studies, with web development, I could write some text into a text editor, save it in a particular location, point a browser at it, and instantly see a result. And that instant gratification I found incredibly compelling and a real hook. Combine that with the fact that you could see how people made stuff by the power of view source. Viewing source was just this incredible cheat code that you could see how people made things and learn by copying. And that was a really compelling hook for me. So I found that, you know, alongside my computer science studies, I was just tinkering and playing and exploring, and critically, I was learning as a result of that. But it was kind of happening by accident. So that went along, and then I graduated, and then I moved from Aston to London to seek my fortune, or more accurately, to get literally any job I could. Had no idea what I wanted to do, but wanted to be doing something with web development. And my first job in the computing industry came not from the direction I expected. So I signed up with a number of recruitment consultants, not really knowing what to do. I wasn't recruited out of university. I was coming to see what jobs there were in the industry for me, and it was touch and go, because, you know, we'd taken an apartment, taken a flat, and was paying rent and needed to pay the next rent, and so the first job that I almost took came through a recruitment consultancy called Hayes, who now are Hayes IT. And that was in distributed computing, or rather it was in distributing computers. They offered me a job driving a van that had computers in it. And I'll be honest, I was this close to taking it. I went to look at their site today to just grab their logo, and I was kind of gleeful to find that their website said they're the temporary offline. Considering I didn't feel appreciated as a budding web developer to see that they have a website that is offline for maintenance. It's like a "sorry, we're closed" sign, which I always find is kind of unusual on a website. But anyway, this isn't about me griping and having sour grapes, because I didn't take that role. And here comes the next little secret I've learned along the way. You select your employers as much as they select you. Now, there's a disclaimer here. This really does reek of privilege when I say this. The fact that, you know, we're not all fortunate to be enough to be very selective at every role, but I think that is something that grows over time. And, you know, I kind of mentioned this right at the beginning because, you know, I was close to taking this job because I needed the money, and I held out just really because I wanted to keep looking. And luckily I did find a job actually in web development, and I found it through web development as well. I answered a job advertisement, and the reason that I was considered for that role is because I had been playing, exploring, and learning, and I'd been doing it on my website. So although I had a resume, I also had a website which, you know, had mostly just my contact details, a link to a PDF of my resume, and I'll be honest, a ridiculous and needless amount of animation on there, because I was learning DHTML, or dynamic HTML as it was known then. Maybe now it would be probably called DOM scripting, or client-side rendering is probably the closest thing to it now. But I was learning and demonstrating things there, and that caught the eye of the person who was recruiting into this first job, who wanted someone who was doing new and interesting things with client-side web development. And I was playing there, and I was sharing what I was doing. So that was very fortunate. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the roles, not in a great deal of depth, maybe not in as much depth as I just did about my almost van driving, but you can tell that's still raw. But this first role that I landed was at a company called CSK Software, who did financial real-time data. So my role was a technical analyst, and I was very much learning the ropes. A big part of it was network support. So I was learning about infrastructure and technical support of the network, but I was also building things that did real-time data distribution. So this was effectively putting numbers on screens for traders in the stock exchange and in various different banks. Now, at the time, this was a real achievement, just getting data through the various layers of networking and firewalls and what have you. We didn't have WebSockets. We didn't have Ajax. We didn't have any of these kind of precursors to what allows real-time data distribution now. But it wasn't an area that I could start experimenting with JavaScript, different kinds of web technologies, and kind of learn from there. So I learned a lot along the way there. And I was there for 2 or 3 years before my boss moved on into another role, and then actually asked me if I wanted to go and join them at their new role as well. So I then joined a company called LSSO, which was very, very different. And I was doing some similar things. I was doing a certain amount of in-house technical support, IT support, I guess you'd potentially call it, but also building intranet applications. So we're still web technologies, but intended to be internal and in-house. Again, I learned a lot of different things here. I was using a different set of technologies to what I'd used before. I was using Microsoft technologies and building on SharePoint, which I didn't love, but that's fine. It was an education along the way. And it was also a real education in dealing with users, because this is effectively, it was a shipping insurance company. So not sounding that exotic and that exciting, but we were the in-house technical support team who were also building applications. So I got to see firsthand how people use the applications, what their pain points were, and that was a whole learning experience in and of itself. So I would say that every role I've done, I've learned something very, very different along the way. And not all of those are about technology. Some of those are about people, and some of those are about myself. And one of the things I learned here is that I stayed there too long. You know, I was only there for about 3 years, but frankly, the last year or so, I wasn't learning anything more technically, and also I wasn't really enjoying it, but it was a habit. So I stayed there a little bit too long. And in the end, when I left because I didn't want to be there rather than because I had somewhere exciting to go. And this is maybe it felt perhaps like one of the bravest in retrospect and riskiest moments in my career, because I left before I had somewhere to land. But in retrospect, I think it was a really important step for me. So, you know, I left there after a few years, and then I got a job at a startup in London called Propero, who were doing all kinds of virtualization management and application management. And there I was a web developer. And so there I was learning from a scrappy team of experienced, but a small team, but of experienced engineers, really building out client-side web applications for managing things. So that felt like a real shift to me from building things with a suite of products and applications into we're rolling our own. I learned so much here about how to design client-side applications, how to do DOM scripting or client-side rendering, as we might kind of talk about it now, and also API design. So I was in the front-end team, and the back-end team sat at a nest of tables over to the side of me, and we would decide, well, what does the application need to do? What's it need to access? And we would design the APIs between us around a whiteboard, saying, okay, well, I need to make a request that will give me these things, and that the back-end team would build those in their Java stack, expose a URL to me that I could then consume from the client. Really, really gratifying things, being able to work in that way and build this application together. The other thing I learned along the way was about JavaScript libraries. This was before the days of a very, very popular JavaScript library that many of you will know, some of you may not, called jQuery. This didn't exist yet, but what I was finding that I needed to build libraries and utilities of my own for repetitive tasks. So we were starting to build our own JavaScript libraries that we would use internally, and that was a real kind of light bulb moment for me as well about how to architect JavaScript applications. So I learned a lot there as well. So moving on from there, so I was there for a couple of years. That seems to be my standard cadence, a couple of years at this point. This was a startup that was then not doing quite so well. It was starting to wilt a little bit. My boss moved on. a few months after he moved on, he asked me if I would like to go and work with him at his new place. There's a pattern that we'll maybe reflect on later on. And so I joined a company that was then acquired by VeriSign, and I was a software engineer there, again doing web development, application development there, and also designing how an application would work. Now, this was a tool for aggregating news content from around the web. So again, it was another aspect of learning about data feeds, learning about API design, and also about what good user interfaces look like. We didn't have a very formal UI design team there at this place, so the front-end engineers that had any particular flair for visuals were not well qualified to do it, but maybe better qualified than other members of the team. So I found myself doing that, and that's an area that I kind of enjoyed and got into doing a great deal. So I worked there for a couple of years, learned a lot, and then my previous boss from another company told me that he was joining British Telecom. So he joined BT, and he was setting up a small team. BT is massive. You know, it's at the time I worked there, it was around 150,000 employees. So very, very different to the kind of environments I'd worked in. But I was joining a small team who were going to be doing web development, building out a front-end application, but also trying to teach the company about open source and the power and the possibilities with open source, because at the time large companies were fearful of open source. A lot of doubt in using software that they perceived was built by one person in their bedroom that they don't really, they're not going to maintain or what have you. And so really trying to educate about the maturity and the way that open source can operate. So that was kind of fascinating. And I did that for a couple of years. And then one of my colleagues had moved on. Actually, before we move on, one of the things I also started doing there, since I was trying to persuade people about a way of working, is I started doing more presentations such as this, not virtually then, they'd always be in a room so people could see how sweaty my palms were at the time. But it was a really good kind of introduction to doing small internal presentations, and then also getting into local meetups as well, which I really enjoyed going along to attend, learned a lot from there, and also started to feel part of a larger community, which is something that I think planted a real seed in me. However, one of my colleagues left. He joined an agency, and he asked me if I would be interested in going and working there. So then I joined this agency with a terrible company name. It was called The Team, which, anyone who's out there who's an entrepreneur who's going to set up a business and give it a name, give it something that's less ambiguous than this. Having a meeting with clients that then you say, okay, there's an action for the team to do this. Which team? It's not ideal. But nonetheless, it was a branding agency based in South London. And I joined there, and on my first day, everything changed for me, because I joined there expecting I was going to be leading the front-end development team doing web development. But actually, on my first day, as I was being toured around the office, I was told, your job title isn't what we agreed, actually, which was a worrying thing for me. And they said, your title is actually going to be technical director, because we want you to be on a par with this other person that we think we're trying to manage out of the political, difficult, awkward, but it felt like a leg up. So I was excited. But really what it meant was that I was in a role that I was not expecting. I was expecting to lead web development, but actually I was also managing people, managing their careers, and also doing strategy. So these are things that were new to me. Maybe I'd had some inkling, but really this is a new experience. After all of these roles, it's a very different experience. It was also my first experience of working agency side, as we're calling it, rather than client side. So that had a different set of challenges and a different level of excitement. It's nice working on brands that you can tell your family about. When you say, at my first job, oh, I put numbers on screens for traders, they're like, what are you doing? What is it doing? I'm making a web application. What is that? When you say, I did something for the NHS, they go, oh, I know what that looks like, or or what have you. This is also where I started to get a bit more opinionated about the way we built things, and started finding that I enjoyed the presentations that I'd been doing, and one of my colleagues cajoled me into applying to speak at a conference, which I did, and to my horror was accepted to give a talk. But that led me into doing conference speaking, which I now utterly love. So again, learning new things there. Uh, and then after a few years there, I joined another agency, again, following a colleague there, doubling down on this technical director role. So now I joined there as a technical director, and then grew into a role of the group technical director, which was just across a part of the business. And here I was doing more web development and more management and more strategy, but luckily I'd established myself there now, so I developed some of those skills, and I was starting now to also do technical architecture, so planning how we would deliver the software and the solution to the clients that came along. And I found I was really opinionated. All of the work that I'd done along my way really led me to be quite opinionated about, we could be doing things differently to how we've always assumed we're doing things. When you're working with very big brands, so the clients here were people like Nike, Beats by Dre, Google, Apple. Those brands tend to say, well, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on our infrastructure, so you will use it come hell or high water, even if it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And so I became quite opinionated about simplicity, building things more cheaply and more effectively and quickly, and actually being able to deliver on time, which led me to kind of more conference speaking about that kind of way of working, which led me to be mentioning a company which I now work for, which is Netlify. So I started being an advocate for using the tools of Netlify, and really that approach to building for the web, which is something that's emerged over the last 6 or 7 years. What wasn't really popular for a long time, since the beginning days of the web, really. So I was really trying to convince people to do that again. So I found myself in a developer relations role, which is about exploring, the tools available to me, explaining them and educating developers about it, and also just being enthusiastic, which is fortunate because it's my enthusiasm that led me there in the first place. So it's really about building relationships, and so relationships is something that you've probably picked up is really important. If I look back at my career, each of these roles, excuse me, the transition has come from following somebody either I've worked with before or someone who I've come to know and has invited me there. I haven't submitted a CV for any of those roles. I submitted one for my very first one, and for this one, this leap of faith. Which isn't to say that that isn't really important. Having a good CV, good resume is absolutely important. But it's interesting to me that sometimes it's been an artifact that you've needed to get through the door rather than the tool you use to knock on the door itself. But there are a couple of times in my career where that's been really, really important. So anyway, the second kind of not really and not much of a secret is that relationships matter, and we build those during every one of our roles. So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, I've waffled on about myself for plenty. Let's talk about some advice and some things that I wish I'd known along the way. So, in all of those roles that you've seen there, at different times I've been involved in recruiting, either as one of the members of the team who's consulted when another person is leading the hiring and is the hiring manager who's responsible for it. Maybe I was involved in some of the interviews and some of the early vetting process, or later being responsible for building a team, or indeed staffing projects. When you're working at an agency, sometimes a project will last for 6 months and you flex the team up and down with contractors. So different types of recruiting, but ultimately they have one thing in common: that's finding people that you want to work with and you believe are going to be fun, pleasant to work with, and capable of doing what you need, that you can trust. And I mentioned earlier on that the hiring managers really want you to be the one, but the kind of behind the scenes, and this sounds like a gripe, but hiring people is tiring. It's hard work. It's often, some people are doing that as their full-time job. I'm fortunate that where I work now, we have a people team who are responsible entirely for, creating this hiring pool that we can work with. But often it's people who are doing a day job already, and then they're tasked with expanding the team. It's tiring. They're tired, and that sucks. It sucks for them, but it sucks for candidates as well, because frankly, candidates don't get the attention that they deserve. You will no doubt pour a load of time and effort and agonize over creating your resume and thinking about how you present yourself. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about the language I use, describing particularly my early roles. So you deserve far better than your resume to be skimmed. Your resume will be skimmed. It's the sad fact of it, because people will be looking at dozens, hundreds maybe of resumes, and so they go through them fast. So I know you've been told this. We've all been told to keep your CV, keep your resume short, often with the advice of ideally 1 page. I would say 1 page is a superpower. It's a real superpower. If you can keep your resume to a single page, that really can go a long way, because the things that are on the second page, and in web development we talk about below the fold, right? And you might even be saying, well, what even is a page, Grandad? Because maybe things are only digital. Maybe you're assuming that it's going to be transmitted digitally, and it isn't going to be a document that's passed around as a doc or printed out or what have you. But here's the other kind of shocker: recruiters reformat your resume. If you're going through a consultancy, very often they have a template that they take your well-crafted, lovingly formatted, beautiful resume, and they force it into this ugly template, which normalizes it for all of their candidates, anonymizes it so much so that they can take their sweet commission without you going directly to them. But the result is, the thing that you've crafted over time ends up looking like something that you don't necessarily recognize. So it really has to come down to the content that's in there. It sounds like such an obvious thing to say, but it's something that I didn't detect in my early days of creating a resume. I think my first CVs were always too long. I never had it down to 1 page. I was told 1 page. I was like, yeah, but 2 will be fine. And after a while, it's like, well, it's 2 and a bit, so we'll call it 3. It's not very much. But being succinct is a really important skill, not just for writing a resume, but just in anything. We'll see that as my timer ticks on and I start speeding up. But writing thriftily is really a very, very valuable skill, because you're showing that you can convey information, not just about yourself, but in anything you write. You can convey information quickly and efficiently, and so doing that about yourself feels counterintuitive, because you want to say as much as you can about yourself, but really being able to be very succinct is a real superpower. I found that particularly in my early career, I would want to be very descriptive about the kind of things I've done, because I wanted to make them sound impressive. And that's a very tempting thing to do, but really having keywords about what the kind of things you've done are, and then really not putting a whole load of descriptive prose in there, can actually really be helpful for someone who's reading dozens and dozens of these things every day. I once received a CV for someone who was coming onto a contract role, who'd done lots of contracts over a long career, some of them as short as like a month, and they'd included them all. 27 pages was the resume.
Wow.
I don't think I digested it all in as much detail as maybe they would have liked. So 1 page is wonderful. Keyword skimming happens, and so make your resume approachable for that. Make sure that you have got a list of like the key technologies and key tools that you've used, and then maybe have some supporting material. There's a wonderful pattern, I think, of being able to say read more and having a link to something, and this can translate both digitally and on the printed page, and talk about that a tiny bit as we go along. I also think, since we're talking about resumes, having a goals and ambitions section on your resume is also really valuable. It doesn't have to just be about, here are the things I've done. Having something that says, this is what I'm looking for, often that goes into a covering letter, but having a very, very short paragraph that talks a little bit about what your ambitions and your goals are is a really good signal for a recruiter to think, oh, this person is going to fit really nicely in with us, because they haven't got the experience of some of the things that we want yet, but they really want to grow into that. And also this fits with our career ladders, this fits with our ambitions for the future, and it also just helps paint a picture of you. So don't be afraid of having a short section about, I'm looking for this kind of role because I want to grow into do this, that, and the other. It shows ambition, and I think it's something that's often missed out on a resume. I'd also say having a URL is a wonderful thing. Now, I'm cautious about this because I've spoken about this in the past on Twitter, which is, of course, where all subtle and nuanced debate happens. I've mentioned that I think it's really important for developers who are looking for roles to be able to have a URL to share their work and talk about the things that they've done. And I was taken to task on Twitter, I think quite rightly, by someone who said, this is a very privileged position you're talking about. Not everyone can share their work. Not everyone can point at the things they've done, either for privacy reasons or intellectual property reasons. So I don't think it's reasonable to say every single person should share a link to their GitHub where you can see the code that they've done. It's wonderful if you can, but I just want to kind of be respectful of the fact that not everyone can do that, and that's fine. But having a URL to something that you do own is really valuable if you can do it. And I think the barriers to entry for this are really, really low now. Being able to get things out into the web is something you don't have to pay any real money for, not even necessarily a domain, so you can do it for free. But if you can have a domain and something that you own as a property, it can be a great shop window, in the same way that I found my very first role by putting a few contact details and playing on a website. So it can be really helpful. It means that you can make it easy for someone to discover more on their own, beyond the mangled resume that has come through a recruiter that doesn't look exactly as you'd expect. I'll be very honest, as someone who's hired a lot of people, I go straight to their URLs. If I'm looking at their resume, I'll skim quite quickly. And if I see that they've got a domain of their own or a couple of links that they've shared, I often go there before I've even got halfway down the page, and then I'll find my way back to it for supporting material. So if you can have a URL of a site of your own that doesn't need to have a lot on it, but just shows some technical taste, some ambition, and some passion for the medium you're working in, that can be lovely. And it's a great gateway for people to discover more on their own. You're kind of looking for a recruiter you want to help them be convinced. They want to be convinced, so give them every opportunity to be convinced. And also, if you own your own website and you're publishing things on the web, it's a great opportunity for you to show off the kind of things you want to do more of. If you're interested in doing, I don't know, this particular form of web animation, and you want to do more of that, demonstrate that you're excited about that on your website. It will entice people to look more into that. If you're interested more in building things with React, demonstrate that, and it will help. Whatever you're interested in, it's a great opportunity to show that that's what you're interested in, and actually it's a bit of a self-fulfilling thing. It will entice people and give people an opportunity to see the kind of things that you care about, which then will yield more results for that for you. And when it comes to URLs, I think it's really valuable to have a URL for a resume, particularly as for all of the things I've just said about a resume. If your resume does live on your domain as well, even if it has been formatted into someone else's format as it's come through to a hiring manager as a PDF, they follow the link to your site, they can find that there as well. And HTML is a wonderful thing. I could do another hour talk just about my love of HTML, but I won't do that. That's for another day. But HTML is a great tool for conveying information, and you can demonstrate your familiarity with it by using it effectively. If you really want to have a short resume, but the opportunity for people to read more, there are HTML elements that expand for that, to show that you can click in and see more, and you can scan everything in a page, dive into more if you like. Then also have things like carefully crafted CSS there, so that the links that you link to can be, you don't need to explicitly type out or display all of the URL. That could be meaningfully hypertext onto some descriptive words, but you can use a print CSS style sheet that when someone prints it, it actually shows the full URL there. So demonstrating not only that you know about print CSS, but also providing utility for someone who might be printing out your URL and can't see the link just by hovering over it. It's a great way to kind of show your chops, if you like, and show your understanding of a medium. And it's really powerful. But mostly your site can just be a place to learn. It can be a really great place to learn. I mean, this is very quickly, my own site, where I was excited to start harvesting all of the things that I'd put onto Twitter and put onto Mastodon and serve them from my own site. Now, the value of the content here, well, actually, it is valuable to me. I don't want this content to go away should something happen to one of the social media kind of behemoths, as maybe it is likely to. So self-hosting it on my own URL is kind of nice, but I'm just going to jump through here. I mean, so I've got a URL for all of the things that I've posted over time, and it even gets down to the point that every single one of my 25,000 tweets that I've got has its own URL. That's again, starting my day making the perfect piece of hot buttered toast. Oh, this makes me happy. End of message. It's not about the content. You didn't need to. It's not all about content. And no hiring manager is going to look at this and go, well, we like toast here too, so here you come. But it's an opportunity for me to show how I approached a difficult challenge and how I tackled that on my own site. It's a great opportunity for learning. It's a great opportunity for play. We learn in the playground, right? So have a playground. It's really valuable. Now, that I would maybe caveat that with another little secret, and that is to say that visibility doesn't necessarily mean profile. And I'm very conscious that these days there are people with a lot of profile in web development. We follow people with hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, or we see people talk at conferences, and we think that profile is what you need. And that's not what I'm advocating for. If you're interested in that, great, that's wonderful, but you don't have to build profile to be visible. I'm just purely saying, if you have a playground of your own and a URL that you can publish and share, that affords you visibility. So when someone is looking to learn about you, you can share that. You don't need to be internet famous to achieve this. It's about having something that's visible. I'd also shared this little nugget as well, which is something I learned by accident along the way, which feels obvious when you say it out loud. Management is not the end game. Sometimes we think about what our career paths will be, and we think, well, I'm starting in my first role in web development, and I'm going to be learning my craft, and over time I'll be leading a team, and over time then I'll move into management. It's the natural progression. As I learned very much to my costs here, when I took on this role of technical director when I joined an agency, and I hadn't expected that to be the role as I joined, I effectively felt like I was starting my career over again, because management and like helping people through their careers is a very, very different set of skills and a very different career path to development. And so this can be a progression, but it isn't the only progression. So I really wanted to kind of call out that the management track and the IC, or the individual contributor track, those are different things. And so try and avoid being suckered into the expectation that your end game is to get into management. That isn't what necessarily defines success for you. It may do. It may be exactly what you're yearning for, but don't feel like you have to make that transition in order for your career to progress as you get later into your career. Really think about what are your goals, and your goals can change over time. I now really enjoy that aspect of my job, but I didn't to start with, and it happened to me by accident. I think I was very fortunate that it fit with me, but it doesn't fit with everyone. And on that note, good employers want to support your growth. Now, there's lots of different types of job you can have, from full-time to contract. And of course, if you're working on a short contract, the kind of duty of care from an employer is a little bit different. They might not be like looking to help you grow through your career with them. It might be for a much more tactical engagement, but a good employer really wants to support your growth and your career growth, I'd say. And so a few things that can help with that, and it's maybe things to ask for when you're in an interview, because remember, when you're in an interview, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. So asking about, a current job description is a valuable thing to do. And there's the word current is important there as well, because sometimes we see a job description that we answer that in a job ad, and that job description doesn't change for years. And having a current job description during your tenure at a company is important. Having a career ladder is also a really valuable thing. It's a good question to ask. What is there a career ladder here at this company? What is the pattern of growth? How do people progress through that? Having manager one-on-ones is another valuable thing. Having regular conversations with a manager in a structured way to be able to raise issues, find opportunities for growth, give feedback, get praise, give praise. Really, really valuable and important part of the working life. And I think it's something to ask about if you're trying to find the perfect place to settle. And also, review cycle. How do those work? Is there a structured way that we get and give feedback throughout the year? And how does that work? Good employers have this there, but depending on where they are in their maturity, you can find that in either wanting or very much in place. So it's a good thing to know about and to have. And then I also add a word of caution, because if I look at the list of places that I've worked, and that very long list that I put you through earlier on, really I look back and I think actually there's only one company where I was promoted when I was there. Every other promotion I actually got from moving around. Now, that's not me saying in order to progress you have to quit and move on, but what I do notice very much these days is that people are good at advocating for themselves, which is brilliant. You should advocate for yourself, but don't slip into the trap of thinking that time at a place should equal promotion. It's not always the case. This is why having a career ladder and job descriptions is important, because then you can start demonstrating, well, I'm doing the job of this role where I'm at this role, and that's the thing that should lead to promotion, rather than just saying, I've been here 18 months, when am I getting promoted? Which is a trap a lot of people do fall into. Okay, I'm conscious of time. 45 minutes. How's that happened? Okay, we're okay. I'll keep moving along. This is similar to one that I mentioned earlier on, about visibility and profile. I also wanted to call out that profile doesn't mean success necessarily either. Don't assume that if someone is giving a conference talk, that makes them the most successful developer in the room. And don't assume that the person with the most Twitter followers is the most successful developer around. So my old boss, Sarah Drasner, used to talk about dark matter developers. It was a kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek expression, because we work together trying to reach developers, and one of the places that we would do it is on Twitter, and we were trying to engage with people on Twitter and at meetups and what have you. The vast majority of people who are building things for the web and are working in software engineering aren't necessarily at those places. They do their day job, they're done, they're happy, they're satisfied, they go home. And that is perfectly valid and perfectly valuable. You don't have to be seeking out the greatest amount of profile in order to be successful. So this is just fine. Enjoying the role and being fulfilled by it is just as valuable as anything else. In fact, I would say that success really comes from being in a role that you find fulfilling and interesting. And so to that end, I think it's important that we keep assessing that. When we're in any role, we keep assessing, is this still fulfilling? I mentioned earlier on, one of my biggest leap of faith was leaving a job that I'd realized that I'd stayed in for too long. I wish I'd made that realization sooner, so I could have been a bit more structured in how I'd made that change. But it was important that I made the realization at all. So keep assessing if you're learning and reflecting on what you enjoy. And if possible, try and shape the role you're in to satisfy that. See if there's a place within your company to progress through the career ladder and shape the role to keep on being interesting for you, and also to help you decide what your future roles are going to be. Okay, 47 minutes seems like that. I said being concise is a virtue. I also think I said I would speak for about half an hour. The other thing to learn is estimating is hard. So with that, I'd say thank you so much for your attention. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'd just be delighted to take any questions and to chat any way you'd like. So James, back I think to you.
Wow, thank you so much for an incredible talk. And as you said earlier, you said, as you just mentioned, it's only going to take me about 20, 30 minutes. And you know what? I'm so glad that you took the time to run through that talk and give it the time that you did, because it was incredible. So thank you
Oh,
so
great.
much. Really, really enjoyed and really appreciate that.
Oh, I'm pleased.
First question we have is from Sam, and says, any ideas how do I overcome a 6-year work break to raise children? I've had lots of achievements professionally prior to leave, but struggling to get my foot back in the door since returning to work.
Wow. That's well, what a wonderful question. Well, first of all, I'd like to think that we're in a better position to do this now than we used to be. I again, this might be a perspective that comes from a certain level of privilege and good fortune in working in a company that really embraces like diversity and people at different stages of their career timeline, if you like. But I think some of the advice I'd have is probably similar to just what I've talked about already. Having things to point at can be really important. Now, after a 6-year break, of course, a lot of the experience that you might talk about will be from a while ago, and some things will have changed, but your tastes necessarily might not have changed. And I think technology taste is something that I often look for. And so I mentioned about listing your aspirations and your ambitions in a resume. I think that's an important thing for you to be able to do. Describing some of the experiences you've had, not just in terms of the technologies that you've perhaps used, but also in some of the challenges that you've overcome. I mean, I did talk about not being too wordy and trying to be like biased towards keywords, but I do think that affording yourself the luxury of some language to talk about the challenges you've overcome, rather than just purely I used this technology, that technology, and what have you, that may no longer be quite so current. I think you can have a slightly different narrative there, but really finding a way to try and engage with the communities that you might ultimately want to become a part of might also be useful. I find that I'm very much enriched by attending meetups and speaking at meetups where I get to talk to people who have a huge range of backgrounds. Many notably actually are recent mums who are getting back into work after a shorter break, maybe a 9-month to 12-month break, but equally finding that challenging. But they've also found that by being part of those meetups and part of those conversations, they're starting to become more current again, and just being more immersed in that community and that environment that then helps them have a more up-to-date vocabulary if they're trying to perhaps bridge a gap from some of the things they used to talk about before. It's challenging, it's difficult, but I think it's very much attainable, particularly now that there's a bigger bias towards people being able to work remotely, either partially or fully, depending on the kind of company you work in. But it certainly feels like it's much more accommodating now, and approachable, and a better fit for people who are getting back into the workplace. So there's not a lot of concrete advice there, other than have things to show if you can by playing, being part of a community, and sticking at it, because I think the companies are out there. So I wish you all the luck with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really sound answer. And for me as well, I think the other thing you mentioned about being part of a community, going to meetups, attending events, etc. And again, that comes down to relationships. But the other thing for me is also the transferable skills that you've learned through parenthood. It's like
Yeah.
being a parent is super tough.
Yep.
There's a lot of transferable skills that you can take. And when you talk about keyword scanning, things like resilience, etc. All of the things that you would talk about when being a parent, and I think that they're really valid as well. Um,
Yep.
the chat is blowing up with questions, so we might run over. Is that okay with you, Phil?
I'm absolutely fine.
Is
Yeah,
that
that's
fine?
fine.
Awesome, because there's a lot of questions coming through here.
Oh, great.
I'm reluctant to use social media and only lurk on Twitter, which comes back, I think, to your point really about profile in the industry. But do you think not having any presence at all on social medias, etc., will work as a detriment when being considered for a job?
Um, I'd like to say no. I I think I'm going to say no. I don't think it is a detriment. I often I often have looked to see what people are saying and doing, expressing on Twitter. I do that. I mentioned very quickly that I go off and look at URLs, but I would place far more stock in someone just having a one-page site of their own, where they've curated some content, and just put a footprint out there. I I myself, so in my role, a big part of how I connect with people, and I'm on broadcast because I'm trying to do an advocacy role for a company, was on Twitter. And I've only recently gone back to Twitter after in November I came off it, and about 3 weeks ago I kind of went back a little bit to be like, well, I actually need to for my role. I just I It should never be the be all and end all. And no, it's not a mark against someone for me, certainly, if they don't have that. And frankly, it shows discipline and character not to be shouting into the void necessarily. So I would say it's useful to have a footprint somewhere, but it doesn't need to be on social media. So it can be your own, and it can be just all you want and nothing more, I'd say.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. Agreed.
Good. Okay.
As someone who doesn't have a degree level education, I always worry that my CV is passed over for someone who does, even in unrelated subjects. What do you think you can include on a CV to stand out against competition with a degree?
So I must admit that I seldom care about the degree. Now, I've worked in companies where particular roles have had it as a requirement because at a particular level of engineering, they're using it as a shorthand. I don't personally agree with that. I think I did I started my learning after I left my degree, and I think a lot of people have. And I also think that there are so many routes into to this industry now that do not include a degree, which are completely valid. And frankly, the experience is more valuable than the pre-experience learning, I'd say. So it's a difficult kind of, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, isn't it, to be able to start talking about experience before you have much experience, which again is a reason I think to have pet projects, have playgrounds and what have you. But I really think that less and less it should be a factor that someone doesn't have a formal degree. Any other training that they can do, great. Any other learnings that they can talk about because of their real experiences, frankly, that has greater weight for me, and I think greater value, to be very honest.
Completely agree. I mean, as a coding boot camp, we're going to say
Yeah,
this obviously, but to be honest,
yeah,
for us, it's, our whole point to people coming into the market is you don't need an undergrad, a PhD. You don't even need A levels to get a good job in tech. What you need to be able to demonstrate, in my opinion, is your love of the technology.
yeah,
You're wanting to not even necessarily code. I mean, we teach people to code, but then they go into careers that are, in digital marketing or project management or even UX and UI. And the
yeah,
point is just having that benchmark understanding and love of technology is what's going to get you into somewhere, and being able to demonstrate it. One of the things we always say to people after they finish the boot camp, it's a very structured time, is, don't stop coding. You're going to want some downtime afterwards. We understand that, but you need to then find your passion, find your love, and find your project, which is exactly what you said earlier.
yeah. I think you're absolutely on the nose with that. I mean, finding a passion and giving yourself license to play and explore and follow that passion, even if it feels silly, you can learn so much doing that. One of my best friends and one of my early hires at a company a long time ago. He left school at 16. He started his own. He started a bedroom consultancy of web development. It was him just doing stuff for a couple of mates. Grew that to a team of 3 people, and then ended up doing contracting himself. I think he's one of the best web developers I've ever worked with, and he demonstrates it by having really good technical taste, caring about the right things, and really just demonstrating a real eagerness to learn. And I just think that's invaluable.
Yeah, if you find something you love, you're going to invariably research and find the things to make the thing that you love work, and that's
Yeah.
what learning's all about. So, I'm just trying to go through because there's so many positive comments as well as questions.
Oh,
So,
great.
a three-parter here.
Okay. Oof.
Your favorite and worst interview question and answer.
Oh, wonderful.
Putting you on the spot
One.
there.
So, so first of all, I think whiteboard coding exercises are silly. I just don't think they're practical or sensible. Getting someone in an interview to saying to someone, okay, do this on the whiteboard. write this code for me. I just don't think it's a real world situation, and I just don't think it's great. I do like whiteboard exercises. I like lines and boxes. I like someone, maybe this is because, you know, I've steered myself towards a bit more of a technical architecture angle, but also I just think it, like, understanding how something flows and fits together is probably more valuable than what's the syntax for this. We're always going to be able to look up the syntax for this. We're always going to have code completion. It's not about learning a syntax. It's about a mindset and understanding a model. And I think that's really important. I did very much enjoy when I joined RGA, which is the large kind of branding agency I joined kind of late in my career. There were 8 rounds of interviews for that, which is bonkers. I think shows perhaps that they weren't very structured in their interviewing. However, the last interview was with the global CTO, who asked me the question, you got a brick and a blanket, what can you do with it? And then went quiet. So I asked a few qualifying questions of like, what do you mean? Do you mean, what's the one thing I would do with a brick and a blanket? And he said, no, I want as many ideas for what you can do with a brick and a blanket as you can have. And then he just went quiet. And so I started rattling off ideas. Very silly, but I think he was wanting to see, when someone just wants to hear a bunch of ideas, how do you handle with going dry apart from anything else? You know, how do you dry up? He was also very good at interrupting you rudely during a technical answer, which he did very deliberately to see how you would deal with difficult clients, which is why I think early in my life, in my career, working with users in an office who thought the email system that you were maintaining was terrible because they didn't know that they can scroll up to see the top of the list. Learning the patience that you learned from that was useful. But anyway, I like mental exercises and opportunities to show creativity that aren't just about testing your knowledge of syntax or grammar. Just that's what I really like. The things I've enjoyed hearing most from candidates as well is when they've gone off on a tangent that I haven't expected, because they're telling me about a thing that they've made that they're really passionate about, and I've just thought, oh, that's amazing, and it's nothing to do with the question I asked, but this is a better answer to, you know, that's more revealing. So yeah. I don't know if that answered the question or not, which is a wonderful example of how question and answers don't necessarily work out how you expect.
No, it definitely did, and I love the fact as well that you've managed to talk about the difference between syntax and creativity. I think we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome later, so I don't want to sort of dive too much into it. But the thing I always get fed back to me is, you know, I feel like I should know every syntax to every language that I've learned. And the truth is that no, that's what Google's for. Like, let's be honest, like, go Google it. The real thing about being a developer and coming into the tech space is utilizing that thirst for knowledge and your creativity to solve a problem. And for me, that's what's so super, super important. And I'm so glad that in every talk we've had, that has come out, because I think that's really affirming to people that are certainly entering the industry. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
What, in your experience, is the hardest role to fill, from dev, QA, back end, engineer, front, full stack? What's the hardest role to fill, and why?
I don't know if I can give a definitive answer to that, to be very honest, because they're all different, and there are different pools of people that fit into to each. What I would say is that, you know, the term full stack was in there as well, and I think that's a harder and harder hat to wear, because the stack is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you know what that means is it's like a galaxy size now. Having someone who is a front end engineer, that in itself is a huge remit. I mean, that could be someone who's very talented at CSS, someone who's very talented at performance. It might be someone who's very talented at JavaScript architectures, web standards. There's, you know, optimization. There are so many aspects of it, and you want someone who can cover a lot of that. To extend that across a full stack and expect someone to be able to be good at infrastructure design, data structure design, database management, it's big. So I think the broader a role is, the harder it is to find someone who fits that.
I was at a
and I
talk the other week actually when a little while ago that someone said actually if you're talking full stack we now have to include user experience and user interface design because
yeah,
if the stack doesn't extend to the user what's what are we doing?
ex-
So
absolutely.
it's I mean we use it in our bootcamp as a full stack bootcamp because we teach the front end and the back end. It's a good way to learn, but
Yeah,
really it's a marketing thing now, isn't it? Really a stack. Anyway, that's a bit of a side tangent.
and yeah, and I think it's perfectly valid in that context where you're talking about learning skills that are across the stack. Um, Marketing yourself as someone who has as a full stack developer, an expert in everything is difficult to live up to. And so actually, maybe I can expand on this question a tiny little bit in that uh, one of the things that I've worked with a lot over the years are uh, proprietary large software stacks. So things like Adobe Experience Manager or Episerver or those kind of things, large monolithic stacks that applications that do a lot. Finding someone who is both a talented front-end engineer who can make the experience come to life and be performant and accessible and all of the rest of those things, who is also an expert in doing that within the context of that kind of application, which might, doesn't actually give you the same levers. You've got to hold everything differently and it's got a load of different constraints. That is really hard because that is an exotic proprietary thing and a discipline specialism merged into one, which is actually one of the reasons I really like architectures that are a little bit more composable these days, so that you can have someone who there's a clear delineation between someone who has this type of skill and that type of skill, and they can work together very, very clearly. So yeah, where there are clear delineations, it's easier to fill the role than when the role is a little bit amorphous, I'd say. That's my best go at an answer to that one.
I think that's a fair answer. The third part of this question is: Are Netlify hiring, and if so, what roles?
I'm sure we are hiring. We do have a careers page. We're still expanding in various areas. We're not expanding as quickly as we have in previous years. There's a little bit of a quiet time at the moment, but there definitely still are roles being hired for. Netlify.com/careers. I said my sales pitch was over. It was a lie. It was a
It was
lie.
prompted. It was
It
prompted.
was prompted. Yeah, I'm just,
You get a free
give the
pass
people
on
what
that
they
one.
want. But yes, forward slash
Superb.
careers is the page. So yeah, feel free to take a look there.
I think I know the answer to this one. I think we've touched on it, but I think it's a great closing question, just in the interest of time. Although, as you've said previously, if people want to reach out, you're available on
Please. Yeah.
all good social media platforms. Um, uh, what is your advice on moving from one industry to web development, or from any other industry to web development?
Really, I mean, it's very similar to the general advice I've been given. I mean, first of all, we've touched on this. I wouldn't be scared away by the notion of I don't have a degree in that, or I don't have a qualification in that. If you're going to learn about web development through a program such as this, or from reading things on the web and getting your hands dirty and playing and experimenting, that's the great first step. Don't be deterred by the fact that you might not have a relevant degree. We've talked about that already. Play, learn, show what you're learning, and demonstrate enthusiasm. I think it sounds really twee and it sounds really basic, and not necessarily that realistic, but honestly that goes such a long way. Being able to point at something that shows that you're learning and you're doing, and demonstrating that enthusiasm and ambition to learn more about it really does go a very, very long way. And so that maybe is the single piece of advice I'd perhaps give.
100%, couldn't agree with you more. Phil, I just want to say thank you so much. I know we're going to see each other later for the panel discussion,
Yeah,
but honestly, an incredible talk. So much value in the Q&A as well. I really appreciate your time and you
great.
being able to pick up and run with those questions so
Well,
fluently, and I really appreciate that.
well,
So
I'm delighted.
until later, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, and thanks everyone for the questions. I appreciate that as well. It's lovely when it's not silence. That's very rewarding. So yeah, thanks ever so much, and I appreciate it, James.
Awesome. We will catch you later. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks so much. See you.